Right, today's daf is daf Lamed Zayin. Omar Avina, right? This is a continuation of what we did yesterday. Hilkach Hatinokas Overis Kolchavim Bashol Shon Yom Echad Hoil Ureuyel Bia Mitabenami Beziva. In other words, the Chacham made Xera that an idolatress, a girl who's born to an idolatrous family, has the status of a nida, of a zava, in order to be marchik us from their women. And the Gemara initially said that that status as a nida begins with birth, as soon as she is born. But the Gemara now, in the name of Rafina, is changing that, and it's going to be from the age of 3, just like we saw before in the case of an idolatrous boy that was born, and we established in the name of Reb Chia that the tumah of zav that was imposed midrabanan on a tinok of an ovi kochavim will begin at the age of 9, because again, if we're trying to separate them from any sort of relationship with a Jewish person, then we start with the moment that they're roy labia. So when I asked Pshita, I would have thought, hi, yodelar gule, v'holo yodelar gule. If you're talking about a boy, even at the age of 9, he might, try to befriend another boy and have some sort of a mishkav zocha relationship. But in the case of a girl at the age of 3, right, she doesn't know, anything about how to get people, seduce them for some sort of promiscuous act. And therefore, we might think that maybe we should start imposing her status as a zava from the age of 9, not from the age of 3. Kamash Malon. Okay, now the Gemara is going back to the sugya about shemen akum, the oil of an akum, and we had established that the shemen of an akum was asur mirabanan, and it was another type of harchaka that to separate the Jews from the non-Jews. Gemara tells the following story: Mistamich v'Ozil, he was leaning, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, akatve, on the shoulder of Rabbi Simloi, of his favorite Talmud, Shameh. Shameh means his Heisbacher, the second in command. And as they were walking, he was leaning on his shoulder. Omalo. So Rabbi Yehuda Nossi said to Rav Simloi, because Rav Simloi apparently was absent at the previous shir, Simloi, lo isa emesh bebeis hamedrash, you weren't present yesterday when in the Beis HaMedrash we nullified the original decree that prohibited the oil of an akum, and he tarnu as Hashem, and we permitted the oil of an akum. Omalo, so Rav Simloi responds to his Rebbe, Rav Yehuda Nisiyah, who's the grandson of Rav Yehuda Nossi. He says, B'yamenu, Omalo, B'yamenu, in our time, it's not only so difficult to prohibit and remove ourselves from the oil of akum, but tatir afis apas, it's very difficult for us to have enough bread and enough bakers to make bread that's accessible for the Jewish people. And you made a gzera, and it's prohibited to eat the bread of a guy. You should be matir that as well. Amalo in Cain, I'm afraid of the reputation that I might get. Korole beidina de sharia. We're going to soon see that if a bezdin was matir something that other batei dinim prohibited on 3 occasions, it gets a reputation of being a bezdin sharia, meaning they're lenient because they don't take it seriously. They're kind of mizalzel in the decrees of Chachamim. Therefore, they're matir one decree and another decree and a third decree. Tisnan, we learned in the Mishnah in Edios that Heid Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Tzreida, he was one of the Chachmei HaMesorah from the time of the Tanoim, Al Ayel Kamtza, we'll see later on what Ayel Kamtza is, but some sort of a grasshopper. And he was made that it's mutter, that you're allowed to eat that species of a grasshopper. And dachan means it's tahar. In other words, tahar here in the sense has nothing to do with tumah contamination, it has to do with being materid for achila. And vial mashke beis mitbachaya. And there was a place right outside the Mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash where they used to shecht the animals for the karbanos, and it was directly opposite the northern wall of the Mizbeach, and that's where they did hafshot, meaning they stripped the hides of the animal, and they cut up the animal. They did nituach, they would nateach the parts of the animal, and there were plenty of beverages of liquids there, mostly water and dam and blood that was floating around. And during the course of cutting the meat, there was obviously, dam all over the place. Blood was splattered all over the place. And then, of course, they had to wash the meat after cutting it up, and they used to lose, volumes of water. And Yossi ben Yoezer testified that these two mashkim of mayim and dam would not be subject to be makabel tumas mashkim. And the reason why he was makil on this, Yossi ben Yoezer, is to avoid too much tumah, the proliferation of tumah in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Chatzar Beis Hamikdash. Now, as far as blood is concerned, blood is not drinkable, and therefore technically it's not a mashke. Mashke by definition means one of 7 mashkim which are drinkable. For example, water, wine, blood, oil, milk, dew, bees' honey. So therefore, in a sense, dam technically would not be a mashke for tumah purposes, but the Rabbanan made a takana that dam is a mashke, and it's makabel tumah. We'll see also if it could transfer tumah to something else. But comes along Yosef ben Yoezer, and he says that Gezerah doesn't apply in the Beis Mitbachayim, in the Beis Hamikdash, because we want to limit the amount of tumah so that we could bring the karbanos betara. Number 3, ve'al dikla de mis va'al di kariv lemisa misaev. Now this is very strange. A person touched a corpse, and he contracts tumas mes, which means he's tummy for 7 days. He's an ava tummy, he's mitami odom v'kelim, and then he has to do hazav v'shlishi v'chamishi. He's got to go through the whole process of mei chatos. And comes along Yossi ben Yoezer, and Ki'ilu, he said the man is tummy. I mean, that's a dorais halacha, and this is not a kula. He's not permitting something that the Rabbanan decreed was also. But in any event, based on these 3 kulos, again, we don't understand why the third one is a kula, Karile Yosef Shraya. He got a reputation, Yosef ben Yoezer, as being a permitter. He would constantly be too lenient on, and this was a critique against him. So now we get back to Rabbi Yehuda Nesiyo with regard to pas akum, that he didn't want to be matir pas akum because he had already previously been matir shemen akum, and now the word is going to get around that he's a permitter. Amalei, so his Talmud Rav Simloi responds to his Rebbe, he says, Hasam, there in the case of Yossi ben Yoezer, why did he get that bad reputation? Because Shara Tlasa, he was matir 3 times. But Mar Shara Chada, the Ishari Mar Chada Achrina, Akati Tarti Hudahavim. My great Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, you were only matir once, meaning pas. I'm sorry, shemen. And now we're going to ask you to be matir a second time, which is pas. All told, that's 2. So you're not going to get a bad reputation because you were matir 2. Says Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, Amalei Ano Shari Achriti. I was matir another thing, and therefore if I'll go ahead and be matir pas, it'll all told calculate as 3. Umayhi, what was that third matir, that permission that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was mekil? Disnan. And now we take a little digression into Masechta Gittin. And Masechta Gittin is a very famous principle called Ein Get Liachar Misa, which means that the get has to be chal before he dies. And if he dies before the chalos hagerushin, the gerushin is possible. Like, for example, if a man gives a get to his wife and it's only going to be valid a year down the line, that's the tanai that he made. We'll soon see that there are two types of tanaim. And he died within the 12 months. So in that case, since the get would only be chal at the end of the 12 months, by then he's dead, so the get is not chal. Unless we apply the rule of lemafreya, which means that at the end of the 12 months, the get will be chal retroactively from the time that he delivered her the get. And then it's irrelevant if she dies in between. So, Zegi, tekem lo basim mikam v'yad shnei masar chodesh, he gave her a get on the condition that if I don't show up here within the next 12 months, the get should be valid. Umes betoch shnei masar chodesh. But here, it's the E-bia, the fact that he didn't come for 12 months that generates the get. So the get's only going to be chal at the end of the 12-month period. And now, mes b'toch shnei masar chodesh, he died before that get could be chal in a get, which means that she'll fall for yibum if there's a yavam, and she needs chalitza. V'tani Allah, and we had a brisa that quoted a dissenting view, and Rabbi Seinu hitiru ali nase, meaning our rabbis, we'll see who those rabbis are, were permissible, and they allowed the get to be chal, which means that the get was chal mafreya, even though he died within the 12 months, but it was chal retroactively from the time he gave the get. And who are these rabbis? It was the same bezdin that removed and revoked the original decree regarding the oil of Akum. Now, whose bezdin is that? That's the bezdin of Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah. And why would they matir? What logical principle operated here to compel them to believe that the get should be chalam afreya? Savrilek Rabbi Yossi, because they accepted the shita of Rabbi Yossi. The Omar, who is of the opinion that when you write a date in the get, the upshot, the meaning, and the significance of that date is to tell you lemafred, meaning from the time of the date, because she's going to use that get as a shtar raya. Initially, it's a shtar kinyan, but she'll use the get to prove that she was divorced, and the get will be chal from the moment that's written in the get, meaning the date of the get. And therefore, when he said to her, and he wrote the date in, he indicates that the get should be chal mafreya. So in any event, we see from this whole discussion that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his bezdin were matir an ashes ish through a get by applying the principle of zmanu shel shtar mofiach limafreya, and that's going to be, if he's matir pas now, all told 3 different kulas, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah is very worried about his reputation. V'yomar Rabbi Abba v'reid Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah hora. Now, even though he himself, the head of his bezdin, Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah, ruled that she can get married based on the get, and the get is valid because we're going to apply the principle of lemafreya, nevertheless, v'lo hodu lo kol shato. In other words, even during his period of time, his bezdin, the members of his court, never admitted that he's correct. The amrile, others say kol seyoso. Even his colleagues did not accept his view here. In any event, what do we see from Rabbi Abba, who's braid Rabbi Chia bar Abba? We see that while Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah himself would allow this woman to get remarried, his court did not agree with him. And therefore, in this case, we can't put forward a second kula because this kula was never accepted. They never gave her permission to marry because everybody rejected Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah. Amalei Rabbi Loza lahu Saba. Rabbi Loza said to an elderly scholar, Ki shri Shrisua, when are you going to allow this woman with this get to get remarried? The alter Shrisua, oh, just 1 second. O Dilma, right to Loasi. O Dilma, da liacher 12 chodesh da yikayim leitna. A man gives a get on the Tanai that the get will be chal if I don't come within 12 months. Then he dies in the middle. If he dies in the middle, there's no possibility for him to come. So we know by definition that the Tanai will be fulfilled. So now, even before the end of the 12-month period, we could be matir her. Or no, should we say no? The get was given on the condition that it'll be chal only at the end of 12 months. And even though we know now for sure, since he died in the middle of 12 months, that the condition will be fulfilled, nevertheless, we have to wait the full 12 months. So the Gemara says, this issue that you're raising, Rabbi Lozo, should be raised on the Mishnah itself. Tiboyle amas nisin. This nan, we have a Mishnah that says, he tells you the Mishnah is Gitna Daf Tzadi, no, Daf Ayin Vav, I believe. And it says there, so he added the word miakshav, and therefore he wants to get to be chalam afreya. Umes v'tov 12 chodesh havi get, and havi get here means that since he added the word miakshav, the get should go into effect immediately if he fails to return. The get is retroactive from the time he gave it to him. And the Mishnah says that if he died without children, his wife can remarry without chalitza. She doesn't need chalitza because the get is definitely going to be chal limafreya. And what does that mean? Ikaim tonight? The Tanai was in lo basi, and we know for sure that he's not going to come because he's dead. So the Gemara says your question that you asked before, we should ask now. But tiboyle li alta avigita doloasa. We know he's not going to return. No question about it. He died. And therefore, the get should be chal already now. We should allow it to get remarried now. O Dilma, or did the Mishnah mean liachar 12 chodesh? Because we need 12 months of lo basi, and for that we have to wait till the end of the 12 months. Enochinam, you're right. Rabbi Loza could have asked about the Mishnah itself. Ela mishum dahavis bahu minyana, since this elderly scholar, right, was in fact on the very bezdin of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi issued that permission to get married. Rabbi Loza asked about that incident, but really it was a question on the Mishnah. Om Rabbi, Hakol modim l'sheteitze cham min atika. If a man says to his wife, I'm giving you a get when the sun comes out of its sheath, meaning when the sun rises, l'chinafka ka'omarla v'chimayis b'leilala get liachamisa. Says Abai, this get will only be chal after sunrise. And if he dies before sunrise, then we apply the principle of ein get liachamisa, and the get is not chal. But however, if he says al menashe teitze chamamyak, instead of saying lichsha teitze achama, he says al menashe teitze chamanatika is me'achshav kamaleh. It's as if he had added the word me'achshav, meaning he wants to get to be chal retroactively from the moment he gave the get. And if he dies during the course of the night, he might say balayla havadei tanohavi the get michayimhu. The get was given during his lifetime. And although he stipulated that what was the language again? Sheteitze almanah sheteitze chama minatika. But nevertheless, the almanah sheteitze chama minatika is only a tanai. He wasn't setting up the time for the chalos. Did Rav Huna? To Yomer of Huna, kala Omer Almanas, kala me'achshav. Whenever you add the word me'as to it, me'achshav, whenever you add Almanas to the language of the Tanai, it means me'achshav, meaning you want it to be chal mafred. Okay. So now we get back to the case of a man who gives a get and he says, Imlo bosim mikam ve'et shnei v'asar chodesh. And you remember that Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah was matir her to get married. And we could compare that perhaps to the case where he gives a get and he says, Almanas shetetzei chama miratika, and Almanas is kibiyachshav dami. So l'nechlaku ela be'im teitzei. If a man gives a get to his wife and he says the get is chal im, if the sun will rise, then we don't know with the word im whether he wants it to be retroactive or not. And nafkamina if he dies during the night. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah savar like Rabbi Yossi, Tiyom zmano shel shtar mochiach alav, v'avalei k'mei hayom imati, k'mei achshav imati. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah understood, based on the principle of Rabbi Yossi, that why did they add the zman in the get? The zman in the get was added so that the get would be chal retroactively from the time of the zman. And he equates it with a man who said to his wife, me'achshav imati, or me'ayom imati, where he's explicit about the validity of the get l'mafreya. Rabbana Lesle de Rabbi Yossi, they don't accept the principle of Rabbi Yossi that zmano shel shtar mochiach alav. V'havi ki get kezeh gitech imati greda mean alone. So it's only like a case where he says, if I die, but he doesn't use the word me'achshav, and if he doesn't use the word me'achshav, it means that the get should be chal when he dies, or after the 12-month period. Gufa, Heid Yossi ben Yoezer ish tzreira. Al ayal kamta. What is this grasshopper called ayal kamta? And why did the Rabbana reject Yossi ben Yoezer, who was matir? Dochan. Al mashke beit medchaya dochan. Val dikra lemisa misay v'kar leYosef shay. My ayal kamta. So the machlok is here about two categories or two species of grasshoppers that were, one of which, I should say, was considered a ayal kamta. Rav Papa Amar, which kind of grasshopper is considered ayal kamta that Yossi ben Yoezer was matir? That's shoshiva. Okay, we'll see what shoshiva means. That's the Aramaic word for this ayal kamta. And Reb Chia Barami Mishmei Dula Amar susbil. We'll see what that. Rav Papa Amar shoshiva. Shoshiva means that the head of the grasshopper is extended, elongated. V'kamiflagi barosho aruch, if the head of the grasshopper is elongated, there's a machlokas mar savar, according to the Bari Plugta, the dissidents who argued against Yossi, they hold that rosh aruch asur, that a grasshopper with an elongated head is not a grasshopper that the Torah was matir. Mar savar, on the other hand, Yossi ben Yoezer is of the opinion that rosh aruch mutter,